Everybody. Good evening, everybody from the TISS fraternity. We have today with us people from the XLRI fraternity, if I might say. Of course, Dr. Zubin himself is a product of XLRI, but thank you all for turning up on what is otherwise a very festive and celebratory weekend. As I was mentioning to some of our batches in the recent weeks, getting the convenience of both Kartik and Steve on a particular day was one of those things that we had to do, and November 6th was available to both of them. So we just taken this opportunity. We are happy that the spirit of the process, which is about dog, is something they also enjoyed in spirit, and we're going to dialogue with them shortly. But before we go there, how did we three meet in the first place? As you can see, perhaps Kartik has less hair than me, I don't know. But Steve does have a few more gray hairs than I do. He's showing it right on his visage. They are older than me by a few years, but we met together first in 2005 when there was a special NTL cohort in India. And we went through their OD certification program together. It's not that either of us didn't know what OD was before. I just kind of finished writing my thesis and submitted it or something like that. But both Kartik and Steve had learned many things to do with interpersonal group dynamics, the Indian way, if I might say, of course, from masterful practitioners themselves before they took up the NTL kind of opportunity. Of course, I'm going to invite them to speak to their own journeys. One thing that I've not done as much as them is actually play the HR head role per se. I was more devoted as a specialist developmental person. But I think both Steve and Kartik have gone the distance on both line and development functions. So I'm going to, let me go in alphabetical. Kartik, why don't you begin by just throwing your voice in? How do you like this opportunity? What's the screen giving you a signal? Let us know a little more about yourself. Then we come to Steve. I can't hear you. Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joseph, and hello, everybody. Quite nice to see 42 stamp-sized faces around, and of which I can approximately see, I think, about 16 or 17 on this screen. So, well, my name is Kartikeyan V.Kartikeyan. Turns out it's quite a mouthful. So it ends up, most people call me Kartik, which is just fine. A little bit about myself. I was born in the year 1965. I attempted to study till 1987. I passed out from XLRI in 87 and then worked for 20 straight years. I worked with some excellent organizations, 4 to be precise. I started my career with the TVS group in the South and then went to Unilever. It was called Hindustan Lever in those days. Then went to Motorola. That was my third job, and one which was one of what I count as a beautiful time. You know, I think in a career, one has a beautiful moment. And that was Motorola for me. And then went to Texas Instruments, which was my 4th company. What I think was significant for me in all this was, I think what I learned from TVS was about family-run organizations. What happens, each of these organizations had a dynamic which was very distinctive. TVS was all about family-run organizations with the patriarch at the helm of affairs. Unilever, I had a very short stint. It was a kind of a cauldron of many things. It was a melting pot. If it was anything different than a TVS, so it was very different. It was, and Steve has much more of experience in Unilever, so he'll speak to that, I'm sure. Then went to Motorola. Motorola was my first experience of an American multinational, very different than Unilever or TVS in terms of a certain way of doing things, a certain American way of looking at things. So learned a fair bit of what happens in the world of autonomy and initiative through that. and then went to Texas Instruments, which was a high-tech organization into chip design and looking at, so most of the phones and automobiles and medical instruments that you see these days are powered by semiconductors that come from the companies like Texas Instruments, Qualcomm, and so on. So all of them had very different HR challenges. One thing that stood me in good stead throughout was, I think in all the organizations that I was in, I had the great fortune of working with some amazing minds, brilliant people. And in those days, I think there was a thing about OD. OD was in the air in most organizations. It was like, there was one way, or they call it by different names, but there was a sense of people being very involved in development in a very, I would say perhaps a very deep and profound way. So that was, and so in all these organizations, I also through them got the opportunity to work with what was known in those days as the process work scenario in India. So there was the Indian Society for Applied Behavioral Sciences, where I started my process work journey. Then moved to ISISD, where I met Steve also, Indian Society for Individual and Social Development. And then went to Sumedas. And then apart from that, had a fair bit of grounding in Jungian work, worked with symbols, worked with group relations conferences, continued to do so. And now I'm the founder trustee of an institution called the Institution for Wholeness and Integration, which aims to do something beyond process work also. So a little bit of a long introduction, but I've completely enjoyed myself in all these work careers. One more aspect which I need to say, which informs my work in a very big deal, is in a very big way, is that I'm also a musician. I'm a Carnatic musician. I play the flute. I've trained for about 40 years, and learning music has been, and the whole journey with music has informed a lot of my work today. And it also paved the way for something that me and a couple of my friends worked with, a framework called the Transformative Alignment Map, which is called TAM for short, which is a way of understanding human systems, whether the system is a single human being or a group or a team or an organization. So that's it, a little bit about me, and I'm happy to unravel more or discover more as this conversation goes. So very delighted, really delighted to be here with all of you, and quite looking forward to a very engaging and an opportunity to learn as much as I can share whatever I have picked up in my few years. Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks, Karthik. I almost forgot that each of us have also written a book since we met first. So thanks for bringing that. Steve, please come in.
Thanks, Joseph. Firstly, I'm delighted to being part of this. And I want to thank each one of you to taking this time out on the Saturday to spend the time with us. As we, with Karthik unpacking his life experience and what he's gone through and mine that follows, would allow you to some context around the kind of things that we've been through, some information, some insights. And also with respect to recognizing the biases, prejudices that we may have because of the life experiences that we've come through. It will also inform you, help you perhaps even frame questions that you might want to interrogate, explore with us, given our backgrounds and so on. So very similar in many ways to Karthik. The first time I got to know him was not at ISISD, but I heard first the lovely sound of the flute early morning that woke me up pleasantly at the Excel hostel. And over the years, we bumped into each other regularly. First,
just to interrupt, on campus, they never called it a lovely sound in the mornings. I've heard different things about it, Steve. But back to you.
So then we bumped into each other at in '92 when I joined, when I started with ISISD, which is our own indigenous way of looking at the human unfolding from perhaps a psycho space, which contrasts with the Western methodology of looking at the human imperatives. So was with that process for a large number of years, 10 years. Then because of an active stint with Hutch, Vodafone, and went through a hiatus away from all of this process, and got involved with almost 18 years of being CHRO in three or four multinationals, Unilever, Vodafone, and the last assignment being with the Diageo. And along the way, I dipped in and dipped out of the NTL program that was organized, went into ICF coaching and that world. Recently, I've started experimenting with group relation conference with Manav and Sukrut. And have been a very active learner, particularly of indigenous framework. So just few weeks ago, we pulled out for NHRD, in my role as guest editor, a theme on Indianness and the Indian leader. And you have several interesting contributors, Devdutt Patnaik and R. Gopalakrishnan and Pratik Kumar and many others, as you see, who have contributed to the notion of what it is about Indianness and what is it about Indian leader. And this is on the back of a book that I wrote last year, which is, the Indian Boss at Work, Thinking Global, Acting Indian. I'm currently an executive coach, and that's my background, Joseph.
Wow, Steve, I think that's the least you could have said about yourself. And I know you're trying to kind of containing yourself, but there's an intersection between both your profiles. And I thought I'll just open up the dialoguing space. And I'm wondering, over the last few decades, what has leadership in India meant? And I'm particularly interested in India because most of our students would try to apply their knowledge in Indian context. So how's that moved on? Maybe, Kartik, we'll begin with Steve and
Okay.
then go on to you, Kartik, because I think you'll bring your own frame. Yeah.
So you're asking me what's my notion of leadership in the Indian leadership?
That's right, leadership in India, as you've known it over the decades of your own work life. Yeah.
So to start with, guys, my entire education, just like as in TISS, is on obviously Western notions of leadership, starting from the big man theory all the way to all the Y by X axis and the behavioral stuff and anthropology and so on. So I'm well steeped into all of the Western models of leadership. But very recently, and particularly with work that I hope Kartik will clarify, with TAM and with the Hume and other work, and the work that we've been doing, a growing recognition that the so-called universal truth or model of leadership, as is popularly understood and imbibed by the West, actually, in my view, is not applicable in the Indian context. Because it is like a good seed which has got some basic properties, which we all are aware of. But for leadership to flourish, it requires the right soil, which in my book I clarified as the Kal and the Desh and the Patra. And you can't take seeds and just throw it in any soil and expect for it to flourish. And therefore, there is an indigenous nature of our soil, which allows the leadership seed to flourish and grow. Such as, for example, to be specific, the nurture and task JPP Sinha's model is the best model for India, unlike charismatic, affiliative, democratic, blah, 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 which many people, TV Rao, others have all found through research to be absolutely ridiculous, and it doesn't work for us in India, and so on. And what is the problem with the Western literature? If you go back to the origin, it's originated from North America and Europe, mostly written by males coming out of universities, and based on weird participants, weird being Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. But the world is not weird. And where is the feminine portion? And therefore, Indian leadership is actually a confluence of two simultaneous processes. The dance of Shiva, the Tandam, of 7,000 years of Kal, Desh, and Patra, on the intersection of a postmodern world, a kaleidoscope of today's modern world. We are a product of these two worlds. So the best analogy, and I'll shut up after this, is imagine you are in NCPA theater doing To Be or Not to Be. So you are talking Shakespeare, but the audience is Indian, the stage is Indian, the actors are Indian, and I say Sai Swaroop, and then you remember I'm not Hamlet, I'm Sai Swaroop. So we are thinking global Shakespeare, but we're acting Indian, and there are parts of our Indianness that are so conscious or unconscious that we may know not, but we are acting it out. And enough said on this.
Yeah, I think you, Steve, you literally almost jumped out of your skin on this question. Thank you so much for that. Kartik, same question, your response, please.
I was just thinking that it's a very interesting aspect that Steve brought out, and I just want to layer on that a bit. So I was quickly looking at the data that we have from the TAM database. So for those of you, I've talked about TAM already, the Transformative Alignment Map. There is an assessment instrument that comes with it called the TAM Self and Leadership. Any of you is interested and be willing to get it done for you. TAM has now a database of, I think, about 3,000, I lost the count of it now, of Indian, mostly Indian. I think there'll be a handful of people from the West who have taken it, but mostly it is being used in Indian context. And so a quick look at the data suggests something very interesting, which builds on what Steve is saying. A lot of people, most managers and corporate executives in India seem to have a personal pull towards, so in TAM, there is what are called the psychological worlds. One is called the world of structure and order, which is, the pull to keep us grounded, the pull to traditions, the pull to be, to search for, to do execution and delivery very well, to do things in a systematic way and so on. And there is also another world called the world of connectedness and nurturance, which is the world of relationships, connecting with others, relating with others, touch, intimacy. There is a third world called the world of autonomy initiative, which is about ambition, strategy, going after things, expanding horizons. And there's a fourth world called the world of flow and unfolding, which is all the creative, innovative, and so on. Interestingly, data suggests that predominantly in the corporate executives, you find people whose fundamental pull is towards structure and order, or connectedness and nurturance, or the combination of the two. These worlds act as very heavy pulls for people. So grounded in traditions, grounded in role appropriateness, grounded in systemic responsibilities and roles, grounded in relationships which often take the familial context. So there is a huge transference that happens in Indian leaders and organizations, where bosses tend to be treated as parental figures, organization is treated as the joint family in some sense. So that transference gets carried out. Yet, if this is the base, the wished for, what people seem to want to do is all about autonomy, initiative, ambition, strategy, want to grow higher, want to become bigger, better. So fundamentally, there is a dichotomy that Indian leaders are dealing with, so that there's a pull towards autonomy, initiative, ambition, strategy, growth, expansion, becoming, powerful in a sense, etc. Yet the grounding is in modes which are a little bit more rooted, grounded in traditions, traditional structures, and so on. So, and I think this has been a fundamental dichotomy that has lasted for a long time. Agrarian, industrial, I would, in my fantasy, I was thinking that perhaps when it came to this era, the post-industrial, post-modern, current era, the things would change. But what I'm discovering is it's not so. It's still grounded in familial beliefs. It's still grounded in structures and traditions. So I think there is an interesting thing that's happening that, and maybe that is, and I'm sure I've read not all of, but most of Steve's book. And I think he brings out these factors very beautifully in it, which talks about, and fundamentally about what is the Indian, I think there is an Indian leader which can be now defined, which doesn't have to be in comparison with the West, but I think there is a standing of its own, which has a certain quality and an aesthetic to the Indian leader, which I think perhaps if I were to take a shot at it, I would say grounded in roles, systems, traditions, beliefs, family, etc., seeking to transform, grow, and fundamentally, therefore, sitting on the horns of a dilemma. And by the way, this dilemma is not a bad dilemma. I think it's something that keeps a certain quality of a paradox going for the Indian leader, and I think it defines who they are and what they are becoming. My sense is it will take a long time, maybe generations, before we see something changing in this, because there's been a very long-lasting kind of a phenomenon. But so that's my take on this, Joseph.
And I just build on something, Joseph, on what you said.
Sorry, Steve, I'll just add one piece to it, which if I take the Western leader, my sense is that their grounding would be more in the world of autonomy and initiative and all that. So and you would, for example, in the North American world, in the West, typically you hear about leaders being typically lone star, a superstar, a single individualist leader kind of a thing, which is very different than and therefore organizations are winners. So there's more of a linear divide between winners and losers, made it and also runs. And I think the Indian leader operates on a much wider spectrum. Yeah, that's my take.
Steve.
So just to connect what you're saying, Karthik, which is this duality, and to build on my earlier point around coming down a 7,000 history and a postmodern world, creates dharam sankatas, dilemmas, polarities, contradictions between the modern and the tradition. And India's habit is to take the modern and make it one more context of the old and traditional, one more context, because it assimilates, it doesn't reject. It adds even modernity as one more context or upon which to look into, darshan it. And therefore, everything is up for review in terms of looking at. And I think the play that I think you just said now, Karthik, is this whole pendulum swing between wanting belongingness and protection of a tribe, of a clan, and wanting to step out of the village and be in the arena and show your muscle and your strength and your prowess. And this swing between, am I my own or am I part of a clan? Am I part of collectivity or am I individualistic? This is the dharam sankata that plays itself up each time in a modern Indian leader.
Lovely. I think you've opened up, you can say, the canopy under which several students are also assessing their dilemmas, and some of them will dialogue directly with you in a bit. And I'm wondering, Karthik, Steve, given your bent for facilitation or something, is there something that comes up in your head that says that, okay, we've got about 42 students, if I might see it right?
39.
No, it's about 39 now. They keep coming and going depending on, yeah. You want to work with them on something that they bring their reality in a facilitated way right now, so that then we learn from the content of the people participating in our process. And is that something of a choice we should have right now?
Yeah, one idea that comes to me is that maybe Karthik and I could open up the universe of what are two metaphors of individualism and collectivism, or one and the other, and to ask each of the participants to look at, am I this or that, or am I a mixture of both? And what parts of me get amplified in this context or in that context could be one way of dialoguing around our own personal leadership. Karthik?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly. I was only saying, thinking that perhaps it might be useful to hear a few voices. I'm just missing the students' voices a bit. So if there is a few, I don't know whether it's questions or views or perspectives or struggles or dilemmas. So if you can hear a few more sound bites, then I think we'll also get a sense of where the mind is, the larger listening mind is at. And then we could take up the exercise. Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay. I do have a couple of students who want to ask questions. And may I ask Prashant, if he's still connected, to please free to verbalize his curiosity. Prashant, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, sir.
Please.
That was a very good start for the session, and I would like to have my bit and my voice to this session, so that could become a very good dialogue, and so we could lead the session forward. So my question is, like in an era where Western centric supremacy is there, like where power plays a critical role and may lead to collapse, like we have seen for Lehman Brothers, and we have seen the successive recession after that. So referring to a leader's Western-centric and Eastern-centric mindsets, so what are the very major differences, and how does OD values play a role in both, and what are the pros and cons of both, like how to move forward? I have not read the book that Tibau, but like I'm very much curious about it. We have talked about Dharma Sankata, and we have also talked about India being a melting pot of various cultures, and so I'd like to know what are the various Eastern-centric mindset as well as Western-centric mindset, and how we can promote our Western-centric mindset on a global level. Like we in today's era, we always follow the suit boot wala culture like that, but we don't have our Western-centric mindset as such. So how could we imbibe that? And I want to know more about on that front only.
Karthik, Steve, can I get in one or two more voices?
Yeah. Better. Yeah, absolutely.
Better, right? Yeah. Reba, could you please state your, I think there's an overlap of some kinds that come up, right? So Reba, please.
Yeah, so my question, and thank you for letting me voice my question as well. My question was, how do we work on driving change initiatives and OD interventions in an organization that is really resistant to change, especially when it comes to employee welfare? So, you know, especially keeping in mind that this organization power lies primarily in the hands of, I would say, just the upper top management. So say only the managing director and the chairman, and given that this organization is, or many organizations like this are family run organizations, so they've kind of made it big over the years, but they want to see change, but they're very opposed to change. They want to see OD intervention, but they're very opposed to it. So how do we drive OD intervention in such cases? So again, it's more a power question, just like he mentioned, like Prashant mentioned.
So you got the second one too, and you see
yes.
the intersection, yeah?
Correct.
So just getting a few more voices in, Reba, if you don't mind. I think you've focused your thing. So as you notice, Reba's is more of the operational thing, like in our context, what do I do? Whereas Prashant was looking at, you know, from a worldview, that kind of question, right? There is a shade of operationalization that perhaps we're going to get here. There's a gentleman by name Nihal who used to work in Asian Paints in R&D. Nihal, are you here today?
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead.
So my question is, to be very specific, that how to convince the stakeholders, particularly the owners of the organization, for a need to change the systems which are a den of ignorance, and who are copying the competitors and not investing in the OD interventions, particularly in Indian context. Because you also mentioned about the pendulum, the extremes of the pendulum of the individualist individualism and collectivism. So I need to understand that that these organizations in India particularly, they are just copying the competitors and becoming a den of ignorance and not understanding their perspective. So would love to hear on this. Yes.
Yeah. So to be transparent about our model, of today's session, I had students to pull in a few questions. These are questions I already know of, but there is a gentleman who's raised his hand, and his name is Raman. I don't know what he's going to ask, so let's check with him anyway. Raman.
Yes, so thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, for this session. So my question is to Steve, sir. Like you said that there is a difference between South Asian leadership tenets and the picture like we possess and the Western leadership. So is this limited to the corporate culture? Because leadership is in many roles, right? It is in political arena, it is in military arena, and if we take military arena, have some knowledge about that scope. So it is more and less the same. But when it comes to politics and when it comes to different corporate culture, then how, or bureaucratic culture, so how does it differ? Where does this philosophy and the difference of literature comes in place, sir? Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, I think that's quite an opening canvas for the two of you, Karthik, Steve. How would you like to proceed from here? It's about 4:33. So over to you.
Karthik, why don't you go first with any one of the questions you want to, or several, whichever.
Sure. No, I think fascinating questions because it's very different ones. Each one of them is different, distinctive, and yet I'm trying to see if there is some thread which holds something there. I'm going to first start with Reba's and Nihal's question, and I thought there was a thread there, and then see if I can jump from there to Prashant's very quickly. And I'm not answering the questions. I don't have an answer. I'm just responding on the basis of a little bit of what I think I have picked up. Because I really think these are very, very fascinating questions. So to me, if I look at owner-led organizations, or and when you want to drive change or bring in OD in organizations where the mindset has a certain resistance, and I then ask myself this question as to what is resistance about. I mean, it's so if I don't pause for a minute and then say that there is some value behind it, then I'm going to think that this resistance is a bad thing. I'm going to think that there is something negative about this resistance, and therefore become somewhat judgmental about it. And my mind went back to Keegan's work on immunity to change, and I thought there's some fascinating work that he has done about why change really doesn't happen even though we commit to change, right? From making small commitments like, say, giving up smoking or starting a gym regimen to organizational change. I think his idea of immunity to change does hold good, because he talks about the whole thing of competing commitments. He says we want to make changes, we make commitments, yet there are competing commitments which we haven't taken into account that comes in the way of our, and that he defines as immunity to change. I thought that was quite brilliant work by Keegan. And I'm drawing on that. I think there is in Indian organizations. So if I pause and ask, instead of the question of what is the resistance about, and I ask myself the question, what are the competing commitments that are at play in these organizations and in the leaders and the founders' mindsets, etc. And I think then you can tap into something very valuable there. Very quickly, and I'm conscious of time also, is I think I feel that, and having worked with the TVS, which was one of those places where I saw this at very close quarters, and more recently I've been working with I can share the name. It's a company called, it's not a company, it's an NGO called the Timbuktu Collective, which is again, it has worked in afforestation and self-revitalization of villages and so on in the Anantapur belt near Bangalore. Again, but held by a family structure at the core. some beautiful aspects come about. I think what the founders or the, I think even Asian Paints is there is a family context, isn't Nihal? I think the Chordias are at the core of it in some.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think that there's something around, I think there is a desire that in the wake of change and in the desire to make those changes happen, in the minds of the founders, the competing commitment or the other care about for them is a certain fabric of the ethos of the founders and the values that they want to cherish and hold. And I think there is a fear that if you look at most of Western narratives or the Western discourse on change is more about doing that which honors the customer, honors the market, honors the economy. The economics of change drive much more than the ethics of change from a founder ethos perspective. So for most of these people, it's not really about economics. So for example, I used to think, and this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I used to feel that in TVS, and those days, sometimes I felt with some of the leaders, they felt that the customer is a bit of an intrusion. I am producing these nuts and bolts and these products and these things. Now I have to suddenly deal with this phenomenon called the customer. Where did that come from? The customer ought to buy what I have produced. And that is not the mindset today, I can assure you. But the sense is that there is something about the pride, there's a family thing to it, there is an ethos to it, there is a fabric of togetherness, there's some pride, so many human elements that I think you can put down there, which I feel that they struggle with, saying that if I were to quote unquote change, is there a way I can change while still being able to value these and not lose them, the baby and the bathwater thing. Though I don't think this is bathwater, nor is it necessarily the baby, but in the rush to change, not wanting to lose some of these very carefully nurtured values. And I think it's a fair question for them, rather than poo-poo it, which we could, to say, yeah, that's all sentiment, etc. It's not. I think there is something to it that needs to be looked at. So that I think is a critical aspect to hold in mind. Prashant, your question was very provocative. I don't have a ready response yet to it, but I do think that if I look at the Eastern broadly, and we can say West and East in a very, today I think it is perhaps more North and South that seems to be emerging as the axis, which I think would need to look at, is I think there is an aspect of, Steve talked about assimilative and looking at things from a wholeness and integrative perspective, rather than make it parts and deal with parts, an analytical perspective, which I think dominates the Western discourse on change, and comparing that with an assimilative and integrative perspective that drives the Indian. Now, I do think, having said that in recent times, one does see, and perhaps this is riding on the wave of a lot of developments that have been happening in the mindfulness space and the consciousness space, that are beginning to find a very significant place in the Western discourse, which I think is all about assimilation, which is all about integration, which is all about holding things together, and which is less about parting and fragmenting and so on. And I do think that the path there in the future, we will perhaps not be talking so much about a Western and an Eastern thing. At least that's my fantasy and my perhaps a little bit of a hope, that I think we'll all be able to forge some kind of a space where we are able to deal with these things together, that there is a pursuit of growth, expansion, yet there is something which can hold things together. And I think my intuitive sense is, I think the discourse on mindfulness and consciousness studies, a large bit of development in neuroscience and is going that way. And if you look at many of the contemporary writers like Brené Brown, who's talking about vulnerability, Susan, forget the second name, who's written this fascinating book, Quiet, which is about the introvert's world. And you have Kabat-Zinn, who talks about mindfulness-based stress reduction. John Yates, Kuladasa, who's talked about mindfulness. so many people. I mean, the list can go on and on. Shizen Young, who talks about mindfulness. Strozzi, who's bringing the body in a big way. So these are all some developments that are beginning to occupy minds, mainstream mindset, even in the West. And I think there is a forging and there's a synthesis that is beginning to happen. I'm sure this will throw up some new dilemmas, but waiting to watch. I think there is an age of, my hope, and I think is an age of some synthesis happening. So I'll stop there. Steve.
So I'm going to speak to notions of East and West and conceptualization of change. The East and West is not a geography. It is an orientation, an approach, a way of thinking, an algorithm, a processing, a darshan, a way of looking. There are people who live in the West geographically who have an Indian mind, an Eastern mind, and there are people in the East who don't have a Eastern mind at all, but are actually Western. So it's sans geography. It's an orientation. The dilemmas, the imperatives that face all human beings are universal. How societies, whether Indian, Western, respond to those imperatives are cultural. So in the pandemic, as Karthik was probably hinting, there is a leaning towards looking after, let's say, economics in the US. And in India, it was about, perhaps something else, about saving lives. And then you, of course, then balance it out. This leaning towards one or the other, this leaning, value, culture, blah, 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 comes from what Foucault called the dominant idea of the time, or Eric Fromm called the social character, or this guy, Yuval, he calls it the imagined ideas. So we have some imagined ideas in India. Keep your shoes outside. Parents should not be put into an old age home, etc., etc. These ideas of what is the way we should behave has a collective archetype around that informs our behavior and our actions. If I were to binary the world of East and West, then you have to put your finger on whether you're this or that. To start with, are you, as Karthik said, holistic, integrated, metaphysical, added to society and to the human being? Or are you analytical? That to find out, about the rose, you keep on dissecting. Reductionist, noun making, labeling. Are you in the world of, flow, or in the world of static nouns? Second, do you believe in one life after you go to heaven, like the Abrahamic religions? Or do you believe in afterlife? Because your music of tal, rhythm, will have circular or flats, like in Western music, depending on what kind of a orientation you have towards music, and so on and so forth. Do you chase happiness, or do you want to remove dukkha? Is another orientation. And are you like that hedgehog of Chopin on a cold, chilly night? Do you stick to each other despite the irritation of the quills? Because there is comfort in familiarity and in jugalbandi and in dosti. Or do you want to keep a safe distance of collectivism or individualism? And these are the large patterns that you have to ask yourself. Do I have a leaning towards being more Western, more Eastern, or am I mixed? And when we say East and West, don't get confused with the guy who sits outside Turkey. The Eastern Western is a function of you versus yourself. Touching somebody's feet in a wedding and handshaking somebody in the office, doing Vishkarma Puja and then calling up, Argentina on a Zoom call. It is, a Sikha versus Narayan Murthy, Tata versus, Cyrus. These are the East and Western mindsets. You don't have to go outside the country. They exist here. And that's the kind of conceptualize. Now, in terms of change, somebody talked about family business and stuff like that. In one of my in my book, one of the chapters, I just want to just share with you and remove some myth. Since 1981, there have been a lot of multinational and lots of Indian companies. The family business has taken the multinational to the cleaners. Okay, has taken the multinational to the cleaners. Look at all the data, look at GDP, look at profits, look at all the analysis. The family-run business is doing a fabulous job in terms of entrepreneurial drives and becoming, unicorns and so on. You just look at the data, and therefore, all the family businesses that I know of, they are very, they are very enlightened. They understand Dhanda extremely well. And if you can make sense to them, not nonsense, like there's a couple of nonsense that happens that comes under the virtue of, culture. Ours is a Birbal culture, for example. You tell your boss quietly that you're doing something wrong to Akbar. You don't, take on your boss, have a backbone, like some American company wants their employees to behave. So we have to make certain that the culture has got parts of the affiliative process, welcomes the feminine spirit, and is integrated in a way which creates parivar, and many of these Indian leaders, CEOs of Indian origin, are actually successful abroad because they carry Indian leadership styles of we are one family, and they bring all the aspects of themselves into those spaces. Yeah.
Lovely. So in a spirit of dialogue, I like to go back to Prashant to check how he has absorbed what you've shared. It's a okay thing to do right now. Prashant, Reba, all of you, can you come in on what you've heard and how you made sense of what's been spoken?
I've got a new perspective, like Kartikeyan sir talked about assimilative and integrative culture. That is, he's having idea like going forward, this will be the way forward. And how Steve sir talked about various aspects, like it is not only about geographical aspect, but within, like in and outside of the culture, and how we has gotten into mindfulness and everything, that would be a way forward. So I think, yes, we have got the idea about how to I have gotten the answer to my question as well. And yes, that was useful. Thank you.
Reba?
Yes, so even I got two very brilliant perspectives from both Kartikeyan and Steve. I think it's given me a lot to think about, especially when Kartikeyan mentioned, competing commitments, and we need to understand that you mentioned, that certain fabric, something about the ethos that is affecting them, that may be affecting the values of their family tradition. And so, if you want to incorporate change, we need to look at it from their perspective, and we need to see how then merging in what Steve said, that you need to understand how to speak to them. It is at the end of the day, how do you integrate change in the form of parivar? So, just taking from both of them, it's two very different, very brilliant perspectives. So thank you so much without giving us the answer.
Nihal?
Yes, sir. I got my answer partly because what Reba was saying, these competing commitments sometimes make them resistant or gives them immunity to change, particularly. And I like the example of this Vishwakarma Puja and all that you mentioned, that they are the something which ethos means that it is engraved and it is intrinsic to the culture. So that is very important. And moreover, the notions of East and West, particularly that you rightly mentioned, that these are the dilemmas of humans are particularly the same, but the responses are culture specific. So this is very much, I haven't thought on that line previously. So I got my answer, but still I'm incomplete. I'm feeling incomplete because my question is something related to that, how to change that this whole thing to bring an ecosystem which appreciates change. That's matlab, I got my answer, but I'm feeling incomplete. Yeah. Thank
But
you.
do you feel expressed? At the very least, do you feel expressed?
Yeah, I feel expressed. Yeah.
Joseph, if I may just come in for just a wee bit, and
Yeah.
I think what I wanted to say, and this is an interesting process that just happened now. Prashant, Riba, and Nihal. Now, to just say just the three of you, because you spoke, but if you look at your three responses, did you notice that all of them are pretty much assimilative responses? You say, I liked what Kartikeyan sir said, I like what Steve sir also said, and so there is something for me to take from this and something for me to take from this. At one level, it's very beautiful. I feel very nice saying, they are, mera bhi value hai, yahan pe Steve ka bhi value hai, and they're forging all of this and they're taking something back from this. That's beautiful. Yet, part of me also questions, where is this coming from? Apart from a very authentic valuing, which I'm not doubting. I'm not doubting that. I'm just saying, but do you look at also the process that sometimes the drive can also come, and maybe this also goes to something which I'm now beginning to research in my mind, called the good boy hypothesis of Indian leaders, a good boy or good girl hypothesis of Indian leaders. And I'm hoping that to publish something in about a month's time. It's work in progress now, which is, I feel that in India, there is also this tendency to be a good boy or a good girl. Doesn't matter whether it's boy, girl, kind of, but it's a good. I have to be good. And by good, I have to then do this of being synthesizing, being assimilative. So one question that I do have, and this is not only for you, but in general to leaders and leadership and organizations, is assimilativeness and synergistic tendencies and pull, is it coming from a conviction that is heading in that direction, or is it coming from a kind of a drive? And if you look at the transactional analysis, there's a drive which is called be nice, right? Or be good, that driver, primary driver. So is it coming from a promise made to one's parent? And by parent, it may not be your physical parent, but a promise made to the parental figure to be good, and therefore to be kind of to synthesize and assimilate, to integrate. Is the drive coming from there, or is it coming from a conviction and a movement which is flowing in the direction of integration? I'm hoping you're able to see the difference. And I just carry a bit of a worry if it's coming from the good boy, good girl hypothesis, that there are unexamined assumptions behind it. So right now, what you said just throws up that question for me. And I think there's a reality of Indian leaders and leadership of somewhere a promise of being good. And I look at it, I work in IT sector in Bangalore, and day in and day out, I meet with people who are typically in organizations that are, the word that they use here and the word they use in the West also. Can you guess what the words that's used for the development centers that are used here? Take a guess. Captive centers. Now, at one level, you can say it's a very functional word. It's captive in the sense, not as if you're held captive. Yeah. But there is also an unconscious around it, that we are captive to something else, that to a hand that feeds us, kind of a thing. And this drives a lot of the unconscious thinking and unconscious attitudes and behaviors. So, and when I talk to leaders here, a lot of day in and day out, I see people who are living out a promise to be good. I have to be the good boy. I have to be the good girl. I must not falter on my execution. I must not falter on delivery. So I must do everything. And I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm not saying it doesn't come from a genuine desire to do very good execution delivery. I value that. But I also suspect that a part of it comes from a psychological. So the manifest is, I honor the execution contract and delivery contract because that helps my captive to grow. But also there is a psychological driver, which is of be nice, be good, be the good boy, be the good girl, be the promise child, that plays into this. And I think there is this beautiful thing that's coming together in India, which is the driver of the promised child, the good boy, good girl, as well as the deep desire to be good execution and delivery. And I think it's keeping India where it is now for the moment. I only have questions about where this will go in the future. And I'm really looking to, I think what Steve said is a brilliant point of family businesses, which I think I have a lot of hope in the younger ones that are coming in today, the new generation that's coming in, as well as startups that are happening. A lot of what is being reported in the Great Resignation phenomenon now is people also beginning to look at joining or creating startups, gig economy coming in. So I think there is hope there. But I'm sorry, I think I'm taking too much time. But this suddenly caught my attention, that are we seeing in our everyday conversations the aspect of synthesizing, which does it come from conviction or does it come from a promise made to a psychological parent?
Let me just jump onto this train, Kartikeyan. First of all, my compliments for picking it up in the here and now with what's happening and directing energy to the current here and now phenomena. When I look at this, some of the symbols of Indian, one is of course the Rama of being a good son, Hanuman of being a good follower, and the fact that in Indian mythology, both from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, one has always got to make choices between two dharmas, between being a son or being a ruler, potential king, and therefore having to make choices, and therefore the dharam sankata as a result. One of the importing that's happened is that of the father, the karta, who is on one hand a combination of the adhikar and the anurag, of strict, disciplinarian, nurturing, protective, loving, and little aloof. And how we have imported him into the workplace. To probably answer this question of Raman, that I'm talking about corporate, where I have at least experience of the karta becoming the father. And therefore, the politics that play itself out are siblings at work with envy, passive resistance, jealousy, and looking for mama, papa, my bap relationship to solve these things. And I think, Karthik, you're making a very good point with regards to that the Indian psyche seems to hold some amount of reverence to leaders. And is there an opportunity for irreverence as long as one is not irrelevant? Is an invitation to all of us, but without the power structure, because in the Indian model, which we have borrowed very badly from the Americans and the British, which is power. Power is a very nice, comforting aspect where the guru and the shiksha work with sneha and shraddha to create surrender and learning. So there has to be a surrender of power and to be powerlessness in order to learn. And the Western model, when looking at this surrender of power, seems to think that one has lost empowerment and so on and so forth. So we need to really look at an emergent Indian, a young India, that holds the past with pride and yet redefines its walking into the tomorrow with confidence and conviction.
Right. Thank you, Steve and Karthik. And I picked up something that there was some kind of a sacrifice made by Raman because he thought probably, in the pattern thing, he'll have a chance to acknowledge what he heard. So Raman, please come in and sense for us what you're feeling, please.
No, sir, the discussion was illuminating. One point to contribute in the present discussion, so which was going on regarding the good boy hypothesis. So there's a good book written by Erin Meyers about the culture map. So, sir, in that book, they have actually enlisted, like if you go to some countries like Israel and some countries, they have given examples, they will forefrontly, the HR managers will forefrontly tell that you are fired. But in some countries, if you go, they'll probably build up, and then they will give you the shocking news. So
that is also can be the idols which we have selected as a culture. Like Steve sir was talking about Lord Rama and the other cultural icons which we have selected has probably created a great impact on the psyche of the, you can say, the leaders. And regarding the learnings which I have made is that there's a book, another good book written like Prisoners of Geography by Prisoner of Borders, if my memory serves me right, by Tim Marshall. So we normally prison ourselves to the geographical boundaries, but sometimes it is more about the ideas and the thought processes and the various school of thoughts. So we need to discern that and then act upon and understand various things. That is my learning. Thank you.
Lovely. Just marking time, all of us. We are 1 hour since into this, and I'm wondering if it's a good time to pivot. Karthik, Steve, would you have questions for people who are gathered here today that they can respond with, given what you're hearing, what you're probing for the world in that sense? Please feel free.
That's a fantastic opportunity, Joseph. And I would like to definitely ask, what are 2 or 3 big, themes that challenges or opportunities that you all see coming up for you all in the decades ahead? What are the challenges and the imperatives and what needs to be squared up on? Karthik?
Absolutely, I would love that. I think it'd be great to hear some of that and see what collective response do we all have.
Feel free to just ask anybody who's out here. It's not that they will not respond. They're just waiting for opportunity, I guess. Please, you can ask anybody.
Okay, let's start.
You can name them.
Okay, so Kalpana, you would like to go up?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just curious to know what are 2 or 3 opportunities or challenges you see young folks like you are going to have to deal with or manage.
So I think, so I have previously worked with Deloitte, and the primary challenge I faced over there was with the mindset, sir. I think there's a lot of, the ideas in my mind versus the ideas which my boss has in his. I think there's a lot of clash between the 2 ideas, and there's like always, I don't know if we get enough opportunities to, sort of put forward our ideas. So that is one challenge that comes to my mind instantly. Yes, so that's something that I can think of currently.
Thanks, Kalpana. Who wants to volunteer?
Yeah, I would like to volunteer.
Yeah,
I
go for
believe
it.
adapting to the changes with the change in technology would be one significant challenge in the coming years. A lot of processes is going to be automated. So, and that will have a direct impact on the human side of the business as well. So that is one idea that I am getting. And I would like someone else to take another point.
Sure.
Yes, so I also would like to contribute. I think the challenges that we are facing, and especially since, Kartikeyan mentioned that gig economy is becoming so huge right now, and startups are also doing really well. But the being in the gig economy and working with tons and tons of startups, what I've realized is the major challenge is power play. It still exists, and there is a lot of, I would say, a battle of power between people, even in the startup culture, and that's why I've seen so many people resorting to gig economy. So people, especially what we've noticed in 2020 is people putting their hands up and saying, hey, I've had just about enough, and I think I should start working for myself or get into this sort of new culture that is created of gig economy. So I think a huge issue that at least I'm trying to, or I'm very interested in, like before TISS started and now even because of TISS, is power play. I think that's a huge challenge that's going to be there for us.
Thanks, Riva. Who else?
So, in my limited and biased opinion, I think climate change is gonna change organizational structures and the whole business landscape, because a lot of industries will get decimated, and a lot of the supply chains and the value chains got created will be affected. That is, I think.
Can I just bring it closer to you all? For example, there are two big trends everyone's talking about. One is hybrid workplace. The second is the shuffle, which is, do I want this kind of a job? Do I want a job which is different? It has meaning in my life, blah, blah, blah. So where does these two fit in to your world today?
So hybrid is like we are hybrid right now, and in coming second month, we're gonna go to college, and then the physical setup will start. So I am experiencing that.
Steve, there was one more hand raised. If you might ask Kailash to express himself also.
Yeah,
I think you
Kailash.
pick up a few themes. Yeah.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Sorry, actually. Yeah, the challenge I was thinking about was like difficult to empathize with the growing, like the new technologies and the digital, all the things becoming digital and automated, and the ongoing importance of mental health, I feel would be the more growing. Because I heard also yesterday one news I read that there were more deaths due to suicides in India than coronavirus in this year. So I was shocked by reading that. So that was also one of the striking point.
Really? Please send me the reference.
Yes, I will surely send.
Sai.
Sir, I was thinking that in the new age of Industrial Revolution 4.0, India is full of MSMEs. So we have about 6 crore MSMEs working in India, and they're not so digitally equipped also. So how can we as change management experts or OD experts bring in that level of capability in them so that we as a country can grow? I think that is a bit challenging task to bring these MSMEs into the mainstream work.
All right. Just a process check. Karthik, are you there? Suddenly I see you, or rather don't see you. Karthik.
I'm right here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, lovely. Okay.
So I just wanted to go and put on the light. So for a moment, I just switched myself off video, went and switched on the light, and I'm back.
Oh, I didn't see your screen at all. Therefore.
Okay.
Yes. Nihal, yours, and then perhaps
Yes.
we can ask Steve and Karthik to respond as well. Yeah.
Yes, you asked about the challenges, but what I see in the current scenario is due to COVID, a lot of economies are closing itself. Means the globalization is the buzz of globalization is going down, and if you see the particularly India, Make in India initiatives and all, though they are making the in our context making the Indian economy strong, but if you say we are talking about we were discussed about the Western concepts and Indian things in correlated. So in the long run, how it will unfold, that is really means really it would be a challenge, I think so, because economies are closing itself. If you see China, India, and other USA, the global trade war going on, and so forth and so forth. So really, it would be a challenge to for a multinational corporations to deal with these situations. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't hear you.
Pardon?
All right. Okay. Yeah, I lost you for a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost.
My question is, in short, is globalization is closing the economies, and if you see the India, China, USA, the global trade wars are going on, and so this is the one thing that uh, that that would be a major challenge for multinational corporations who are operating in different geographies. So how to, I think it as a challenge. I perceive it. Yeah.
Okay. Is that exact? Mayuk, let's hear you too, and we'll give it back to our guests. Yeah. Yeah.
So as everybody was talking about like globalization, industrialization, even the power play, as Reba told, but what I feel that the main problem right now is the acceptability factor, what I feel, because we're talking a lot of things, but when it comes to acceptability, we're not accepting what is happening and what are we expecting from the whole scenario? And I think in Indian context, it is not the current situation. The acceptability is not a very recent thing. If we see from the times of Ramayana also, people were very stringent, like not accept, like open to ideas and not acceptable. Like the whole event of Sita Mata getting inside that is also because people were not accepting the fact that she was whatever they call Pavitra and all. And also the power play aspect that comes from Mahabharata also, we can say that everything revolves around the acceptability factor. Nobody is going to leave a single inch of ground for anyone else. So like rotating around all these things, taking examples from ancient India to present, great vast to everything boils down to the only single factor, according to me, the challenge being acceptability. So if like anyone could like highlight about this aspect of.
Just to
Yeah.
clarify, Mayuk, are you
Yeah.
meaning acceptance of what's around us?
So the concepts that we are trying to put forward as an OD or a change management personnel, the people are not that clear about what we are actually trying to put in the plate, and their overall mentality that is coming as a hindrance to them. So I wanted to talk about
Okay, maybe Karthik and Steve can pick up on, but thanks for clarifying. Yeah, Steve, please respond now and maybe
Karthik,
ask some.
you want to
more.
go? Karthik, you want to go first?
Sure. I just wanted to say that this is fascinating because if I just look at the array of things that you all have brought up, and that's just 5 or 6 or 7 voices speaking. I mean, imagine if everybody was to speak. And I've really touched, and I just want to add one piece to it. So I'm looking at what are you calling as trends. So there are a few things which are a little disturbing. There are some which I think hold a promise. On the disturbing side, I certainly think that climate change and what's happening in the climate side has elements of deep disturbance. What's likely to happen, and I'm at a personal level, I have questions about COP26 and where we are headed with it, etc. Are we really serious when we say net zero by 2070? Not just from India, but other economies as well. So questions around what, and that clearly is going to be a big impact. And so I'm looking at, this is perhaps the age of catastrophes and big changes, tsunami size changes. So climate change is one of those, certainly. Trade wars, I think somebody mentioned trade wars and protectionism across borders and really playing one's partly nationalistic, partly jingoistic, partly restrictive economies, etc. Economy use as punishment rather than as opening up of barriers, as the trade war aspect clearly shows us. The third disturbing trend is that of the mental health concern that somebody mentioned, which is again, I think, very disturbing. It is definitely true that the mental health thing is a cause of concern, and when these are talked about as concerns, and I think, and I will bookmark that and come back, I think these need to be woven into the fabric of organizational leaders, practitioners, and thinkers. And I'm so glad that you're voicing all of this. On the other side, I see maybe questions around what's the role of technology and how is technology going to play a part, because technology is in many ways the pivot around which many of these things are happening. Networking in today's times and use of technology, use of big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and wherever else it is going, these are things that are going to drive decisions in the future. Also very positive, I think, is that's beginning to happen is a trend which I'd like to add to what you've already stated, is that the opening of, I think there is an increasing feminist perspective and opening of, so for example, looking at LGBTQ as something that's in organizational spaces, that is accepted, increasingly gaining acceptance, and not in a patronizing way. I think it's moving away from that to genuinely valuing, a heterogeneous kind of a workforce. I think these are some seeds of changes that are, I think, positive. And they also need to be in the forefront of organizational practitioners, saying it's in many ways, in these ways, I think it's different than the industrial era. And I don't want to just simply call it post-industrial. But I think there is some era that's emerging now, and I think it is defined by these very complex things that we are talking about. They're complex because and if going back to the whole work on I think Canefin model of complexity that Snowden's work on, beautifully he calls out where you have organizations which are which are not complex, which are in many ways pre-complicated, where you can deal with things using best practices. Then you have complicated systems where you look for good practices. And then you have complex systems where you have neither best practices nor good practices, but you have emergent practices. And so there are some questions which we will never be able to find answers to, but we can, through the process of dialogue, find responses to. We can find perspectives on which we can stand. And I think, to me, that is the singular only hope, if I really think that the only hope that we have for healthy, vibrant organizations in the future is to move our mindset from finding answers to finding responses, to searching for responses and perspectives that can hold many seemingly conflicting views together. And so if there is one thing I would say in a holding everything together way again, is to say, can we shift our worldview to say that there are no longer puzzles to solve, but these are in the nature of what sociologists will call as wicked questions. How can you end world hunger? You cannot end world hunger. How can you solve India, Pakistan? You cannot perhaps solve those wicked questions, but can you find, through the process of dialogue, can you forge mutual understanding? Can you forge some kind of a perspectival position on which differing views can stand? And I think if you are able to go there saying that, look, you and I differ, but we don't have to differ violently. We can differ with respect. We can differ saying that, yes, your view is different than mine, and that is heterogeneous, and that is good. And I think that's where organizations, so I've been pulled to this word called polyphonic in some organization theory that I read recently. Polyphonic, which literally means multiple voices. And today's, perhaps the postmodern world is really that of polyphony. Can we hear multiple voices, not necessary as babble, not necessarily as voices which are shouting over one another, but can we realize polyphonic voices as voices that are seeking coexistence? And I think that's where the hope for many of these things, whether it's climate change or trade wars or mental health or so many other things that are happening, I think there is some hope in finding a space for mutuality and interdependence. But I really want to say again that these are amazing things that you have talked about, these trends that you're catching. I think these are beautiful. If you're catching onto these trends and you're saying that's where an OD practitioner or an HR person or a leader needs to move, or organizations need to move towards, I think that's very, very encouraging for me to listen to.
Come, Steve.
So fascinating, Karthik, just listening to what you just said. I want to just build on this polyphonic that you talked about, and in the here and now, if you notice, there were 8 voices that came in. 2 were women, and 1 by invitation, then jumping in. So obviously, one data point around inclusion and diversity that we need to provide for, build for. The second is that in the nature of, when I heard Kalpana and Reba talk about the issues, at one level battling with, the tyranny of power and ideas, or the tyranny of managing to work with startups and gig. And so there's that whole self of me and I in the societal world that we come from and finding our feet. The men have started to engage with the broader contours of what Karthik just provided, about climate and mental health and economies are closing, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the 2 different streams of issues that come in. I am, for one, on technology reminded of Heidegger, who said that technology is actually leading us, dragging us by the scruff of our neck. And the more I read about technology now, it is steering us through benign pro-liberalism around how we should and should not behave, how we should act and not act. And with this meta kind of world, we will all be living in another matrix without our permission. So that is one tyranny that makes me wonder about notions of freedom and so on, that we need to engage with from an OD perspective. The other bit that I was acutely missing is the whole element of an India that believes that the world is one family, issues of humility, sensitivity, issues of aloneness, solitariness, aloneness, issues of compassion. And where does all of this lie? Especially in a post-pandemic world. Does it have any place? Does it have any place? It left me with some amount of curiosity. Where is that part of the equation that is also necessary for our world? Joseph.
Yeah, I'm tempted to break the flow a bit. Okay. And this kind of is to reframe ourselves before we go into the next part of our thing. So I'm going to ask the two of you what in other shows and typical television or chat shows might be like a rapid fire, but this is, I think, a good point to come in with that. So given the trends of issues we picked up, question to both of you, what's one book that you would recommend to your own 25-year-old self? You know, our students are anywhere between that age till about 35, 37 and things like that. So if you look at that, your lived self in the past, what's one reading that you might recommend to your own 25-year-old self looking back?
There's a lovely book called The Psychology of Money that I stumbled into and I find fascinating. I wish I had read that 25 years back.
Do you know the author name?
Just Google it. It's a fairly bestseller.
Thanks for being a sport on that response, Karthik.
Good question. So I have two actually. One is the book. The other is, it would not have been possible at my 25-year-old self because there was no YouTube in those days. But if there was, I would have loved to have caught up with Sarvapriya Nanda in those days. So today I'm listening to him. Not a day goes by when I don't listen to any. I find his work on consciousness, Vedantic thought, fascinating because he does it absolutely non-religiously. He's got a very amazingly, holds it things in a certain way, which I think is very powerful. So I would have loved to have, started that many, many years ago. But the other one, which I think I would have really liked, would have been Ken Wilber's. I have a collection of Ken Wilber's books, which I recently picked up in a bargain sale.
Wow.
Which, and it was, I thought anything I could pay for that was a bargain, honestly. But if I got it in age 25, I may not have understood most of it, but it would have been a treasured possession to kind of begin some reading on.
Lovely. Thanks for those temporal reframes. A couple of more questions and then we'll again open up, all right? So there was this theme of mental health. So a question from that point of view. And I think both of you have worked deeply on your own selves and you understand compassion as sitting with, another person's darkness, right? What's the most difficult aspect of that? Sitting with somebody else's darkness.
Being, I think, in touch with your own and feeling incapable, incompetent, vulnerable, not knowing what to do, and being in a space where one is completely bereft of, but just having the courage to just hanging on and staying there for the other and offering presence.
Lovely, lovely. I
Simply
hope
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would simply say a big ditto to what Steve said, and I was just scanning my experiences of being with people in their most emotionally vulnerable moments. And I think what has happened for me, the struggle I've always had is that our mirror neurons kick in, right? And so one's mind is then taken back to one's own darkness and one's own struggles of a resonant nature. And I don't think that there is anything called working through and completing or arrive. I think closure is a bit of a myth. I don't think we arrive at closure on any of things. It's nice to hear the word closure, but I think the ability to have it open yet contain it. And I think that's what perhaps process work allows us to go to, is to be able to visit your own darkness, but not get inundated and carried away by it. So for me, the difficult ones have been visiting those spaces in myself and holding a non-judgmental, compassionate view to oneself, and knowing that if I start judging myself, then I'm automatically judging the other in the same moment.
Lovely. Just a follow-up question on the same theme. Looking back, to arrive at your kind of response that you've just given to this question of sitting with somebody else's dark, how long do you think it took you to arrive at this kind of point of view?
I personally don't think I have arrived anywhere yet, and nor do I hope I ever do. But I think so. I've had some incredibly wonderful experiences right from the time I started working, of people who. So those were the days when I think the process work movement in India was at its peak, I think. And so both Steve and I think we've been through the same schools of that kind of work. And so I think maybe by the time I started being able to facilitate in some of those was perhaps 2002, 2003. So I would say about 15 years of some kind of fairly rigorous, visiting one's own caves has happened, and then in some ways then starting to co-facilitate, facilitate, etc., opened up. And I think that's a rough estimate for me. Steve?
I think whether you jump off the cliff or you climb 99 steps and then fall, it is that fall that happens. It's the fall that creates the insight. And so far, as Karthik was saying, it takes 15 years and all, etc. It is that whole process of the 99 steps. I guess what I want to just say is when the student is ready, the insight appears. So it could be instantaneous to how ready is the student. I think all the 15 years is doing the preparation for it.
Right.
To be ready.
Yeah, I hope you're able to intuit the spirit of my questions, because here are learners who are wanting to, become more accomplished and competent in the service they're offering. And a couple of more questions before we go back. One, what for you is the difference between mindset and paradigm? Because the word mindset came up, if you remember, today.
So, okay, if I look at paradigm, is ways of thinking. Okay. Yeah, ways of thinking. It's a platform around ways of thinking. When I look at mindset, I look at what I call the epistemology of thinking. And every Kaal, every age has an epistemology around offering how to learn, how to think, how to work. So the epistemology will change over a period of time. Paradigms are weather, epistemology is climate. And I can trace epistemological thinking over the many, many years. Yeah. And I can think of paradigms as a more shorter burst. Is it making sense, Joseph?
Just to clarify, by epistemology, you mean the search for the original truth?
the way learning is learned, how truth comes through. What is the process of learning?
All right. So you express yourself, and that's the objective of the query here. Karthik.
Tough one, honestly, because one has tended to use these somewhat interchangeably.
Yeah.
But now that you have posed the question and thinking through it, I think what my mind is veering towards is that a paradigm is perhaps something that's like Steve said, there is an era prevalence to a paradigm, that in this call, in this era, in this time and in this space, there is this paradigm operating perhaps, and this paradigm might change in another, and as the circle of time goes on, paradigms get questioned, they move into another. Like, for example, I think at a very organization level, you can say an operating paradigm could have been that of centralized functioning. And then something starts happening and then you question it, you move into decentralization.
Yeah.
And then that paradigm runs for some time and then you start centralizing again, or integration and differentiation, perhaps operate paradigmatic kind of ways. Mindset to me is a little bit more located in persons and collections of persons. So within a paradigm, I might have multiple mindsets. So in a scarcity paradigm in the world, I might have a mindset of overconsumption because it's scarcity. I might have a mindset of saving because there is scarcity. And I might have a mindset of distributive economics because there is scarcity. So I think in some sense, there are those differences as well to look at.
Lovely. I'm glad you responded to it. And I know you weren't as prepared, but I was trying to pick up some key themes that came up so far and thought I'll easier last kind of query before we actually go back into dialoguing. I'm just interrupting the flow, as it were. It's simple. Although Karthik, you did share your passion for music, Steve used the metaphor for music, the flat notes vis-a-vis what happens in terms of overall loops and flows here. So what's it from music that resonates most with what you might call vibrational energy in organization? If that's a question you can respond to.
Well, this is like, you hit a lofty ball thinking you're hitting a sixer and then it lands in the waiting field. This is something I love. So again, perhaps because I have been schooled in music, and music is at the heart of TAM. So TAM is all about resonance, coherence, and evocation, which take from Indian music. So Indian music, for example, I think when the notes, if let's say you're a singer or an instrumentalist, doesn't matter. You first of all, need to find a base for melody, which means you have to have the first resonance. I think use the right word there, the resonance between your voice perhaps and in the south we call it tambura, in the north you call it tanpura. There's a drone that allows for the synthesis to happen there. Without that, you don't have, if you're playing Western music, your scales need to be tuned. Otherwise, it's going to be cacophony. And so that's the first thing. And then you need to render whatever you're rendering with a certain rhythm, whether it is a song or a rag or whatever, has an inbuilt rhythm to it, which we call as coherence or layam, talam, etc. And finally, it needs to be able to create an evocative space where multiple emotional things can come together. And maybe it causes delight or disturbance, we don't know, but there is an emotional evocative space that's created. So to me, organizations are actually one way. Say Gareth Morgan looked at organizations as many things, right? Including a psychic prisons and biological organizations and so on. I'd like to look at organizations as musical notes in formation, constantly forming, reforming, and changing and dissolving and so on. And so to me, if as a practitioner, if I'm able to understand the dynamics and also the politics of resonance, coherence, and evocation, which directly take from Indian music, that gives you a space for alignment which can be transformative. Otherwise, you can create alignment which is just coordinative, maintains status quo. But if you want transformative alignment, then you need to be able to literally be able to understand organization as music and work with it. But answering this question, Joseph, is honestly like my father used to say, never try to grow a banyan tree in a flower pot. He used to say, Brian, you can't put more on ground somewhere. So,
Yeah, lovely use of metaphor, and I'm sure people pick that up more in the book that you have written with all the impregnation of structure, order, and things to do with connectedness, and on the other hand about expression, the autonomy and all of that piece. Thank you, Steve. On music and organizations, what's your
Yeah.
kind of take?
See, I think Indic wisdom offers through the Manduka Upanishad the 12 shlokas of the primordial sound of Om. The Trimurti of creation, preservation, consolidation offers again the whole conceptualization of what music in a sense does. Like electron, neutron, and protons, I think music at a construction of a chord has a tonic, subdominant, a dominant tone, which I think what Karthik has clarified. And essentially there, some is creating, some is consolidating, some is destroying, and some is lending itself to the scale management and the movement and all of that. So I think what is the lesson therefore from a management perspective? That's where you want to transfer learning.
Yeah.
And there's one chap, one consultant, forget his surname, Govindarajan. Is it Govindarajan? From
Gupta and Govindarajan, the innovation there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He uses the Trimurti model.
I see.
He uses the Trimurti model to ask organizations what aspects of processes they wish to see. In organizations that people process technology. So again, put the triangle in. Which one do you want to create, consolidate, grow, destroy, start anew? Ask those questions in that triangle, and you'll get a whole refresh OD way of looking at things. That's perhaps a way of looking at OD from a musical perspective.
Oh, lovely. Actually, there were a couple of people who were immersed music and all that. I don't see them on screen right now, but nonetheless, I'm now going to invite a couple of students who haven't spoken, but may be very interested in ask few things. So let me check their sense of flow. Dipayan, you want to bring some chemistry into this? What's coming to your mind, and how do you like to serve your sense of inquiry at this stage in the conversation?
Yes. So as I was eagerly listening to Mr. Kartikeyan and also Mr. Steve Correa, so one thing came into mind, and one thing that was discussed earlier, that good guy hypothesis that CEOs have been following here, and how the Tata legacy, not only Tata legacy, there's so many Indian companies where the CEOs don't tend to get swiped out easily. For example, if I take my company, Cognizant. So Francisco D'Souza was replaced, and then Brandon Price came, who came from Vodafone also, and where another person might have replaced him. So those things, yes, there's something. What can I say? Tradition also comes into play, and it is in Indian DNA, you can say. And so I was just listening to, and all those things were playing into my mind, and also another thing that I was literally reading that article that Mr. Steve Correa was talking about regarding the German psychologist on technology. Heidegger, I believe. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. So I was just glancing through while listening to this only, and it was quite fascinating how technology is revolving and how we as human beings are being a part of it. And someone who is coming from pharma industry and also worked in IT industry, I can see how it is revolving. And so as I myself have worked in data points, and those data points might be seeming like number to us, but each of the data points were individuals, as those are, what can I say, clinical trials data points that I worked in personally in the pharma R&D department. So I can see all those things progressing, and how human life is getting changed, how it is impacting the management as a whole. So all those things were coming to mind. So that's a, what can I say, hodgepodge of all the things that is going on.
All right, thank you. I'm now going to ask Rahul. Rahul, are you listening? Rahul Sharma?
Sir, he messaged me that he is having some bandwidth issue.
Oh, all right. Okay, fine. Then let's see who else. Praveen Venkat. Are you in the session right now? Praveen, yeah, Praveen.
Yes.
What's your sense of the occasion, and how's it on your side? Any residual queries that we must pose our guests?
Only one of the residual query which I have is that, right? Why there has not been any innovative methods, right? Post appreciative inquiry into the OD. Why there have not been any new methods which have come up in OD? Right, particularly from the Indian context, right? We have seen most of the methods coming from the Western world, right? The Lewin's concept, the quarters concept of models, right? Why haven't Indian models have come in the context of OD?
Our guests will have a lot to speak to that. Let me just check.
I want to jump in right away with a quick response.
Please. Yes.
Praveen, excellent question. And by the way, this is just a view I have. It may differ from several others' views here, but I feel that a lot of this has to do with the era that we are living in. That I think in some ways, I think the time of big models which aim to provide answers and responses to practically everything, and have an encompassing, enveloping thing. I think that era has gone away. It's in the Trimurti thing. It's perhaps in the decaying part. And today, and so there is a postmodern thought which will question all of these models to say the model itself tends to hold power. Then appreciative inquiry then becomes touted as a way. Just like action research sometimes used to get touted as a way of providing solutions. And look at many other things, like even process work was touted. So there was era of action science and action research, an era of process work kind of thing, an era of appreciative inquiry, an era of, so even though Joseph talked about dialogic OD, right? I don't think these are going to become eras in the current era. I think they are going to be bubbles which will come, and there will be multiple bubbles that will occupy some attention, and they will kind of, some of them will coalesce, some of them will vanish. So I think it's a very good question, but my view to that is, I think it's not the failing of OD per se or the failing of thinkers. And if people, and I've been on some OD lists where Joseph and Steve are also there, where there's some bit of chest beating on is the OD relevant, etc. My critique of that is, I think they're questioning relevance from past paradigms of OD used to be this glorious thing that used to provide these citadels of answers for organizations, and it's no longer so. And so some looking back, it's some angst kind of a thing. But I think the OD of today is going to be model agnostic, and it's going to be more transient and quick move on kind of a thing. So, and I think that it also performs a very useful thing of questioning underlying power structures that go into what Steve called as epistemology. So if you say this is the epistemology on which we will base our thing, then there is a certain power that is accorded to that epistemology, and that I think the era is questioning today. So that's just my view. I think it's a damn good question again. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that a model is retrospective. Most authors who write these models, they come from academia, they build a community of practice, they do some research, and then they write the model of what happened in the past and clarify it. And the past model has got no relevance to the future, even for the present, because they haven't tested to see whether that model has got emergent contextual reality. Okay. The work that we are doing in India, some of the work that, for example, even the work that around TAM is looking at a model, if I may use the word model, to offer exploration into the nature of the being and becoming in the human equation around how I'm feeling, thinking, behaving, and responding. What's evoking, what's revoking, what's dominant, what's subdominant, what is repressed. It seeks to inquire into the ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. It's not a model. It's not a psychometric. It's not an instrument that says you are a positivist, reductionist label of this or that. It offers exploration, because our Indian thinking is embedded in psychosocial contextualization, as opposed to a Weber's iron cage that comes from a post-agrarian industrialized model.
Right.
I hope
So
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. So it's a moving away from the pigeonholing the Cartesian coordinates of the West to expand the world of meanings and the deeper structure of experience and phenomena. If I'm reading both of you all from that point of view. How has this conversation been for you all so far? Karthik, Steve first, and then we'll go to the participants from TISS as well.
I'm very engaged and excited. Huh?
What excites you?
No, I just love the questions and the thinking and the multiple perspectives that has come through.
Okay, and what's your impression of this emerging generation? What does it hold for us? What's something that comes up as lovely lead indicators of the future?
I want to take that question and think about it, Joseph, because
Lovely.
there's quite a lot of depth to what is happening right now.
Right, Karthik, what's yours?
Same, I think delighted actually, because so far it's been great. There's not one moment that has been dull or made me to look at time and so on. It's like flowing. I mean, it looks like it can continue for the next 45 minutes or so, and it will be still good. And I think for me, the answer to your second question came when I listened to students here talking about climate change, technology, about trade wars, about all the things that we talked about of what was the other one? Mental science, mental health. Beautiful. I think these are, so the knobs that you're looking at are at a much larger, much at an ecological level. And I think that makes me feel very positive. I'm going out, when I end this conversation, I go out feeling that has been time well spent, and feeling it, I'm already left with a sense of hope that if this is the quality of thinking, I think that's very good.
Right. So we get an immersive feel of these people. They're invested in their learning, not financially, but emotionally invested in the journey. So that's the sense of hope. Am I reading your sense there, Karthik?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I want to invite two ladies, particularly from the executive batches, two different batches. And if they're listening to me, I'd love to hear their sense, because they're very measured and very, let's say, concise when expression. One of them is Shweta from our current batch, and the other is Nandita. Do you hear me? Can you please come in, and what are you picking up so far? Yeah, Nandita, you're on.
Yes, sir. This is very enlightening, especially when Mr. Kartikeyan was speaking about the feminine spirit. That was very interesting to hear. It's something that I would like to hear more about, especially in India. He was saying that about the transference, the nurturance. Even Mr. Correa spoke about that. So that was something that I would like to hear more about in this context, especially.
Okay. Thank you, Nandita. Shweta, do you hear us? Are you in Baroda today? Where are you? Well, possibly she's not tuned in as well. And that's one of the things about technology.
No, I'm there. I'm
okay,
there.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I've been, I'm trying to tune in, but there have been some disturbances at home. So I have not been able to listen to the whole entire conversation.
I see.
Yeah, but I will let him address the first question, and I'll put my thoughts together, and I'll have something. Please give me some time to reflect. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just 10 minutes away from scheduled closure, so I thought I'll check with you.
Sure.
Anyone else would like to raise hand and say, hey, I wanted to say this, please. Reba, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm taking all the questions for this entire class. But actually, I had a response to something that Steve had questioned us on, and he spoke about hybrid culture. And he asked, what's our opinion on hybrid culture? And the only reason I wanted to bring this up was because yesterday itself, we had a conversation. We were about 10 people sitting and having this conversation that now work is starting again, and we're being called back to office. And I said, what's the feeling? What's the sensation that you're going through right now? And almost everyone responded with this one word. And so I wanted to get both your opinions on this one word, trust. And they said that the hybrid culture in India can't really work well because trust doesn't exist. And this was by far the response I was getting from all 10 people, and all of them coming from different, say the MNC background, the consulting background, right? Varied, all of us had varied backgrounds, all have about between 5.5 to 7 years of experience. So I would like to get your opinion on the concept of trust in the Indian ecosystem, because most of us are of the opinion that it doesn't exist. So if you have a deferred perspective, I would love to hear it.
That's an interesting demographic, and I wonder, Steve or Karthik, who would like to go on this?
Karthik, you want to go first?
Only thing, I'm just a little worried about time, since just 8 minutes, and both what Reba has talked and what Nandita has brought about are very large canvases to touch upon. So I'll just offer a very quick one. So let me take up what Nandita said first on the feminine and aspect of all of that. And I've said this earlier also, and if I will state that again, if any of you is interested in knowing more about this, I would invite you to please take a TAM assessment, and you can reach out to me through Joseph, and I'd be happy to set up, because we talk about the feminine and the masculine in a way that hopefully is not, that's not gender people, right? And be able to still have a dialogue with people. So if you're interested, that offer is open for you to please take, and you can understand how this model looks at masculine and feminine in a certain way. Otherwise, we'll have to then open up this whole thing for another 20-30 minutes of discussion. That's the only dilemma I have. On trust, I think this word is, you can understand it very precisely. You can understand it very in a very large way. You can not understand it also. But I usually use, many of you may have heard of this thing called the trust algorithm. And if you're not, you can Google it and check. And but I have changed it slightly. So I put a little bit of a Karthikism on it. So the trust algorithm goes something like this. It says, if you Google will tell you that it is credentials multiplied by credibility multiplied by intimacy divided by extent of self-interest. I've given it a little bit of weightage. I feel that 1x weightage to credentials, 2x to credibility, and 3x to intimacy divided by self-interest. And what I mean really by that is, to have trust in any equation, like even now, if you trust me and Steve, well, our credentials have played a part. Yes, I mean, we have done what we have done. We have worked in the organization we have worked. We have done some other stuff we have done. But just winging it on our credentials would not have created, and I think we have created together, all of us have created a very healthy and vibrant and robust dialogue today. But just winging it on credentials would not have worked. Then there's a credibility part. That the credibility loosely is, does the person say what they do, or do they do what they say? They come with a promise of saying they will do something. Are they reliable? That's okay. That's one part of trust, but the weightage for that is just 2x. The third element to me is the most critical one, which is the extent of intimacy. And by intimacy, we are talking really about the ability to converse at a level where there is equalization. There may be differences, but differences are not held in hierarchy. And there is equalization, there is compassion, there is care, there is respect, and that kind of intimacy, not violating boundaries and holding respect together, that is 3x. Now, all of this can be kind of eroded or diminished by the extent of self-interest. So if one, it's not that you can't have self-interest, you will have self-interest, but if you can hold your self-interest, pare it down to it's not all about you. It's also about the other. It's about the community also. So if you can hold your self-interest at a reasonable level, then you give a chance for trust to flourish. On the other hand, if your self-interest is high, you want to get out of, you want to, do things that are more serving your self-interest, then invest more on the numerator. And if you're investing more on the numerator, invest in 3x on the intimacy part, because that's the one which is going to get you the level of trust that you require. So I'm sorry, I made it a little mathematical, but that's how I kind of tend to look at trust. And I think it helps me if there is a non-trusting relationship somewhere, then this framework helps me to spot where might be that difficulty in trust emanating from.
Yeah, I think on trust, rather than ask a question, do you love your spouse? Or ask instead, are you loving your spouse? Have you studied versus are you studying? So trust is about, do you trust or are you trusting? It's a continuous process of engagement. And that is because in every bucket of trust, there is doubt. And every bucket of doubt, there is trust. And so it is a continuous process. And I think what Karthik has said offers a paradigm around thinking around it. On Nandita, your question about please do take up the TAM proposal, because it offers a very comprehensive view about the Nar and the Nari, the feminine and the masculine forces, and how it goes through multiple processes that one lives in simultaneity. And the Indic wisdom has us believe that the human factor has got all of these forces. No one is Nar, no one is Nari. Our gods and goddesses have got swords and komal, flowers. The woman has to amplify her swordness, and the male has to amplify his holding the flower. And therefore, that integration is what we need to truly own up to in order to be human. So I think it's the humanness in the workplace. Unfortunately, for many people, as you go into HR and so on, the wider we discuss, men are from Mars, women from Venus, blah, 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 we widen the chasm rather than solve the problem. And that's my truck with most HR people that talk about diversity and inclusion these days. Yeah.
Okay, we're almost marking time, but I'd like to respond to Reba as though I were an uninvited guest to her question, because this thing about trust, while Steve spoke to moving to the gerund rather than the noun, trust is to me more of a dynamic. Why? Because there is a giving up of resentment involved simultaneously with the vigil on what could go wrong. And either of these axes missing, we don't experience the dynamics of trust. And I think those 6 or 7 people who gathered around to examine trust in the opportunity of the hybrid workplace, are they giving up resentment enough as also putting in the kind of vigil to make hybrid happen? That's another way of looking at it. And if you don't put these two together, the dynamic of trust is not experienced. Because if I'm not willing to forgive my own self, I wouldn't know how to give up resentment with you. I can't establish that intimacy if I were to use Karthik's word. So to me, that's the other aspect of trust. Marking time
Thank
again.
you.
Yeah, marking time again is, I think, a very, very poignant and important dimension of our context, which somebody, and I forget the person who brought that up, it was the MSME sector. I think we're going to see many more smaller organizations creating value that will get unlocked thanks to emergent kind of technology and all of that. And to me, whatever emergent perspective that the works of Karthik and Steve provide are not just applicable to mid or large size organizations. I think there's a huge underserved quote unquote market from a capitalism point of view, which can address those areas as well. And for me, this dialogue enlivens the possibility that very live and dynamic minds and hearts that we see in the form of Karthik and Steve can continue to serve. And to me, when I see the intersection of what you're learning and what these people have held for themselves, is a very genuine, authentic use of their own selves. And I hope you picked that up. They continue to be living models of themselves. And I thought that was my kind of hunch from which I said, let's bring these two people to your group. That was what my overall objective was. I think I'm just going to give it back to Steve and Kartik to say a few words before we close out as absolute courtesy for the time and free-spirited sharing that we have done. Steve, Kartik. Yeah.
Thanks, Joseph. It's been a real pleasure to be here. It's been a huge learning for me. And I would really love if some of you who haven't spoken, just share a word, a phrase of how this entire 120 minutes has been for you and get your voice in writing. That would be good to read. Kartik?
Absolutely. And really, like you put it, Steve, delightful, enjoyed it. Time hasn't flown. I mean, I've just not even paid any attention to time. And lovely to connect up with all the students. And I've learned a lot about the thinking of the young minds that are entering this world. And so there's a lot of hope. Otherwise, I tend to be a very cynical kind of a person in some sense. But listening to this conversation is helping me very much. And yeah, I just want to say one, and this is a statement made by Carl Jung, which I'm reminded of when he says that, you know, he who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens. And so I think for me, the whole thing has been really, whether it is self-transformation or team transformation or family or society or community or planet or cosmos, I think the key is not looking in like the Mullah Nasruddin story where the light has fallen, but to look within and awaken to possibilities that are there. So that's the only thing I want to say in closing. Thank you very much.
And congrats to you, Joseph, for being the master chef.
Not at all. There are two people who still would like to serve. First is Raman and Shweta. Your hand was raised. We'll come to you soon. Raman, you wanted to say something?
Yes, so my question was regarding whether there was a follow-up question. I don't know whether the time permits to be taken it, right? So it was like we were talking about various vectors of the trust. So there was a brilliant research done by University of Minnesota HR department. They said that this hybrid workplace and the smooth transition was possible because of the social capital which was created when they were present physically. So if I say ki I am building new relationships and all the social capital has been exhausted and used, now can that trust and social capital be formed while being in hybrid workplace? Because if it can, then it's a go-go, then we can transform. But if it cannot, then in my limited and biased opinion, sir, then it will be a troublesome transition, right?
So I think you should continue to be in touch with Steve and Kartik. They'll be open to your LinkedIn requests and all of that. Okay, lovely point. And surely something that I will look up. I'll look up my contacts in Minneapolis as well to check for that research. Okay, Shweta.
Yeah, so since I said that I was attending partially and there were some disturbances, I have some question which has been on my mind ever since we, as a part of coursework, something that was on my mind. If there are OD initiatives that we do for the workplace, like I'm in an HR role and I take on an OD project for the workplace, how do I stay as a third party or become objective rather than staying internal? Okay, and how do I look at my peers from a consultant hat? How do I do that?
Yeah, Kartik, Steve, I think that deserves a response, please.
Yeah, I'm just one small thing is because I've contracted time for something else, so I will really need to leave now. I wish I could answer or respond to this question, but I'd like to take it offline if it is okay with all of you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah. So with your permission, can I move on at this point?
Thank you so much, Kartik. I'm glad.
Joseph and Steve, thank you so much. Yeah. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
Steve, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I just think that there was an OD consultant by the name of Dr. Zayed Ganji. 25 years back, he wrote a lovely article called The Impossibility of Being an Internal OD Consultant. In my own experience of being CHRO for 18 plus years, 35 years in HR, it needs a special mindset. Because see, as an HR person inside the organization, you have power, decision-making, impact, influence. And everyone knows it. Same like being a coach.
Sure, yeah.
So it's very tricky, and of how do you bring that objectivity in while being an insider. But Joseph, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer to the extent that, I had this very, very supportive boss in Ranjan Acharya, and he said, no, you shouldn't call yourself internal OD consultant. I said, no, in the spirit and content of the practice, we're not doing OD. So that's the other end, Shweta, of the whole spectrum. And in those years, Kartik interviewed me for the, I forget what was the name of the Human Capital magazine or something. I think you should read that piece to examine how I approach the internal tension. With that, I will offer a very, very modest response rather than, beat drums of a particular kind, Shweta. But your question is something relevant in that I'm picking up desire to make impact. We need to be supporting that more and more. Maybe over the weekend, I'm going to write to you of what I'm attempting to do differently to enable this kind of internal sponsorship and internal courage. So if that is okay,
Sure.
that's my response to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Joseph sir, hi, Sejal this side.
Yes, Sejal.
Sir, if that's okay, the response that you're writing to Shweta, will it be possible to share it with me as well?
Yeah, all right.
Because I was also thinking on a similar thought process and similar line, so that will be
All right.
really helpful.
Will do, will do.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, sir.
Right. Is Prashant still here?
Yes, sir, Prashant here.
Oh, very dutiful. Would you like to just say something on behalf of TISS, because I know you're a very dutiful citizen out there, and then we can close. Yeah.
Yeah, on behalf of entire ODCL cohort, I would really like to humbly say a thank you to Steve sir, JG sir, and the V.Kartikeyan sir. And it was really engaging, enlightening session for us because we learned a lot, and we learned a new concepts over here, and that was really a good way forward. And the session was enlightening in the sense we also get to know about what should we do forward as well as other things. So I think that was overall a good session as well as great session. And thank you JG sir for arranging the session, and thank you Steve sir, V.Kartikeyan sir, for the time you have spent with us.
Reba, an alternate point of view from the executive batch.
I absolutely loved the conversation. I'm so sorry for taking up all the time with the questions. If we had another hour, I would be asking many more questions. But I think you gave us at least me, I got a very insightful, a different perspective, a different thought process. I have to go back and think about a lot of things, especially related to my organization, because the responses I got, I can completely now go back and think about, okay, how can I change the way I think about this problem? So that was something that I really appreciated from this session, that I can directly take it and now use it at the place where I work.
Lovely. So I hope Steve's request for a sense of what the session was has come through, and they'll continue to be in touch. I think we've touched a kind of depth of meaning structure here. And in what Reba just mentioned, she used the word response. So I think the spirit of dialogue was still retained in that we've not come to a force-fit kind of conclusion to questions, but the exploration continues. So with that said, I'm very happy to have reconnected, although I had finished my teaching duties with the both the batches, actually, the executive and the master's program. Thank you very much. Make the best of the rest of your weekend, and goodbye and good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.